"You call this service?" the billionaire's son barked, his voice echoing across the golden-lit restaurant. "Can't you even pour water without shaking like a child?" The crystal glass slammed against the white linen table. Water splashed across the imported cutlery and ran down onto the trembling hands of the young waitress. Her eyes widened in panic. She tried to apologize, but her voice cracked before any words came out. Every head turned. The hum of conversation stopped, replaced by a hush that made even the air feel heavy. A few guests whispered. At the corner table, the son's group of friends laughed, the careless laughter of people who'd never been humbled a day in their lives. The waitress bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. Her fingers tightened around the half-empty jug as she whispered, I'm so sorry, sir." But he wasn't finished. "Pathetic," he scoffed, leaning back in his chair with a smirk that dripped with privilege. "Absolutely worthless. Do they hire anyone here now?" The pianist paused mid-note. The clinking of glasses stopped. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. The waitress lowered her head, her dark hair falling forward to hide her face. She turned to leave, humiliation burning her cheeks, when a shimmer of light caught his eye. A small old bracelet clung to her wrist, its silver beads dull with age, yet glowing faintly beneath the chandeliers. His grin faltered. For the first time that evening, silence replaced arrogance. His hand froze mid-air, the mocking word dying on his tongue. That bracelet. He'd seen it before, years ago, on someone he thought he'd never see again. And in that single silent moment, the billionaire's son, Adrian Blackwell, felt the ground beneath his perfect world begin to tremble. She walked away toward the kitchen, unaware of the storm. That bracelet had stirred inside him. Adrian's friends exchanged puzzled looks. "Yo, Adrian," one of them whispered, chuckling. "You good, man? Why'd you go all quiet?" Adrian blinked, forcing a dry laugh. Yeah, I'm fine." But his eyes stayed locked on the kitchen door. His heartbeat quickened. He knew that bracelet. He remembered it vividly, every curve, every symbol etched into its silver. It had belonged to someone his father once spoke about in hushed tones. Someone from the past that his family never wanted mentioned again. The restaurant, Maison d'Or, was one of the most luxurious in the city. Golden chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, soft jazz floated through the air, and every table was dressed in velvet and crystal. Yet in that shining world of money and noise, Adrian suddenly felt small, smaller than he ever had. The laughter of his friends returned, filling the room again. Waiters moved carefully between tables, pretending nothing had happened. The pianist struck a new note. But inside Adrian's mind, chaos brewed. Why did she have that bracelet? It can't be the same one. Can it? He reached for his phone, pretending to check a message, but his reflection in the screen looked different. Pale, uneasy. The arrogance that usually coated his voice now cracked with something unfamiliar. Fear. Meanwhile, behind the swinging kitchen doors, the young waitress, her name was Amara, leaned against the counter, exhaling shakily. Her hands were still trembling. She'd dealt with rude customers before, but never like this. Never someone so cruel, so deliberate. Her friend and co-worker, Lila, whispered, "Don't let him get to you. They think they own the world just because their daddy does." Amara forced a smile. "I'm fine," she lied, brushing her wrist gently. The bracelet clinked softly. Her mother's bracelet. The only thing she had left from her family's past, from the life they'd lost because of the Blackwell Corporation. If only she knew the man at that table was a Blackwell. Narrator's gentle interlude, natural viewer engagement. Before we go deeper into what happens next, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this story from? It's incredible how stories like this connect people from all over the world. And if you're enjoying it so far, don't forget to subscribe. It helps the channel grow and lets us bring you more powerful stories like this one. Back in the dining room, Adrian couldn't shake the image from his mind. He pushed away his plate, suddenly losing his appetite. The waiter approached timidly to ask if everything was all right. Adrian's voice came out softer now. "Who's the girl serving table 12? The waiter hesitated. "Her name's Amara, sir. She's been here only a few weeks." Amara. The name hit like déjà vu. He stood up abruptly. "Cancel dessert. I'm leaving." His friends stared. "Bro, what's wrong with you? You just made her cry and now you're acting weird." Adrian didn't answer. He just stepped out. Into the cool night, the echo of that bracelet still shimmering in his mind. Outside, the city lights blurred in the distance. He leaned against his sleek black car, closing his eyes. The memory wouldn't fade. A child's laughter, a fire, a promise broken. The bracelet was more than jewelry. It was a ghost from a past buried under money and lies. Inside, Amara wiped her tears and straightened her apron, ready to face the night again. Neither of them knew that tonight's encounter was only the beginning. The moment that would unravel everything they thought they knew about their families, their pasts, and themselves. That night, Adrian couldn't sleep. The laughter of his friends still echoed in his head, mixing with the image of that trembling waitress and the faint glint of silver around her wrist. He lay in his penthouse apartment, city lights spilling through the glass walls, but all the brightness of wealth couldn't quiet his thoughts. He got up, pacing near the window. That bracelet. It wasn't just familiar. It was identical. He remembered being 10 years old, sitting in his father's study. There was a fire crackling in the marble fireplace, and his father, Victor Blackwell, one of the most feared businessmen in the city, had taken a small silver bracelet from a velvet box. This, Victor had said, belonged to the Harris family. "They used to own the land before I bought it. They didn't take the deal, so I made sure they had no choice." Adrian had been too young to understand what that meant. But now, years later, the memory hit differently. That same bracelet, down to the carved initials on one of the beads, was on that waitress's wrist. He sank into his chair, guilt crawling into his chest. Was she one of them? Did my family destroy hers? The next morning, Adrian returned to Maison d'Or long before the dinner rush began. The manager looked startled. "Mr. Blackwell, we're not open yet." "I'm here to talk to one of your staff," Adrian said quietly. "Amara." A few minutes later, Amara walked out of the back door, her hair tied up, her uniform neatly pressed. Her expression shifted. From surprise to fear when she saw him. "Sir," she whispered, "if this is about last night, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to." Adrian raised his hand. "No, I should be the one apologizing. I was out of line." She blinked, confused. Billionaire sons didn't apologize, especially not to waitresses. He hesitated, his gaze lowering to her wrist. "That bracelet. May I ask where you got it?" Amara's hand instinctively covered it. "It was my mother's," she said softly. "It's all I have left of her. Something cracked inside him." "Your mother, what was her name?" "Evelyn Harris," she replied, eyes narrowing slightly. "Why?" Adrian's throat went dry. Harris, the same name his father had spat out with pride years ago. The same family whose land the Blackwells had taken to build their empire, Amara, noticed his silence. "You know that name, don't you?" He looked up, guilt flashing in his eyes. I think my father might." She laughed bitterly. "Of course he does. The Blackwells made sure everyone in our town remembered that name, for the wrong reasons." She turned to leave, but he stepped forward quickly. "Please, Amara, I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I need to understand what really happened. Her shoulders tensed. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she looked back at him with a calm, broken kind of strength. You want to understand? Fine. She unclasped the bracelet and placed it in his hand. My mother wore this the day your father's company forced us out of our home. She never took it off, not even when she died trying to stop the demolition. That's what this bracelet means. It's a reminder that your family's fortune came from our ashes. Adrian's eyes burned. He had no words. The cool metal of the bracelet felt heavier than gold, heavier than guilt itself. I'm sorry, he whispered. I can't change the past, but maybe I can fix what's left. Amara stared at him for a moment, searching his eyes for sincerity. Then quietly she said, Words won't fix it, Mr. Blackwell. Actions might. She turned and walked back through the kitchen doors, leaving him alone with the bracelet in his trembling hand. Outside, the morning light touched the city skyline. For the first time, Adrian didn't see skyscrapers. He saw ruins built on someone else's dreams. And as the bracelet's silver caught the sunlight, he made a silent promise to uncover everything his father had buried, and to bring justice to the name that bracelet carried. Adrian sat in his car outside the restaurant long after Amara had gone back inside. The bracelet lay in his palm, its silver dull, its weight unbearable. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel rich. He felt hollow. His driver cleared. His throat. Sir, are we heading home? Adrian didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed on the bracelet, on the faintly carved initials, E.H. Evelyn Harris. The name echoed in his mind like a forgotten ghost. Finally, he spoke quietly. Home, and cancel all my meetings today. The drive to the Blackwell mansion was silent. The house, a monument of glass and marble, loomed like a symbol of everything his family had taken. Adrian walked through the golden doors and found his father sitting in his study, the same room where he'd first seen the bracelet years ago. Victor Blackwell looked up from his newspaper, his silver hair neatly combed, his voice cold and commanding. Adrian, you're home early. I thought you had dinner plans with your friends last night. I did, Adrian said, stepping forward, but something happened. He placed the bracelet on the polished desk. The metallic clink echoed in the quiet room. Victor's eyes flickered toward it, and for a brief second something sharp crossed his face. Then he leaned back in his chair, pretending calm. Where did you get that? Adrian's voice tightened. From a waitress. Her name's Amara Harris. The silence stretched. Victor's jaw tightened. Harris, he muttered under his breath, then looked up. I warned you to stay away from those people. Those people? Adrian snapped. You mean the ones whose lives you destroyed? Victor's gaze hardened. Watch your tone, son. You have no idea what you're talking about. I think I do, Adrian said, his voice rising. You took their land. Her mother, Evelyn Harris, died because of your project. You called it business. But it wasn't business, was it? It was greed. Victor stood now, slamming his fist onto the desk. Enough! The echo bounced off the marble walls. You think you know what it means to run a company like mine? To keep thousands employed? Sometimes sacrifices have to be made. Adrian's eyes burned with disbelief. Sacrifices? You call destroying families a sacrifice? You call a woman's death progress? Victor's expression didn't change. She refused to sell. We warned her. She made her choice. Adrian's heart pounded. For the first time, he saw his father, not as a powerful businessman, but as a man who'd buried morality under money. And her daughter, Amara, she works as a waitress now, struggling to survive in the same city that made you a billionaire. Victor shrugged coldly. That's not my concern. Adrian took a step forward, fury trembling in his hands. Then it's mine. Victor's eyes narrowed. Don't tell me you're planning to get involved. You'll destroy your reputation. Our investors— I don't care about your investors, Adrian interrupted. I care about doing what's right, something you've forgotten how to do. The room fell silent. The ticking of the antique clock filled the space between them. Victor's voice turned low, dangerous. You're my son, Adrian. Remember that. Everything you have, every luxury, comes from the decisions I made. Adrian looked at the bracelet again and said quietly, Then maybe I don't want what comes from your decisions. For a moment? Victor looked stunned. Then he laughed bitterly. You think you can fix the past? Foolish boy. The world doesn't care about guilt. It only respects power. Adrian picked up the bracelet and slid it into his pocket. Then I'll use my power differently. He turned and walked toward the door. Victor's voice followed him. Walk away now, Adrian. Don't let guilt ruin you. Adrian stopped, but didn't turn around. Guilt doesn't ruin people, Father. Silence does. And with that, he left. Outside, the evening air felt heavy with truth. Adrian leaned against his car, exhaling deeply. The world he'd lived in, the mansions, the luxury, the perfect smiles, all felt poisoned now. He pulled out his phone and searched Amara's name. No social media, no trace. But the name Evelyn Harris appeared in an old article. Local, woman dies protesting Blackwell construction. The words pierced deeper than any insult. Beneath the article was an image, a little girl, no older than 7, holding a single bracelet in her tiny hand. That girl was Amara. Adrian's chest tightened. He had mocked her, humiliated her, not knowing he was humiliating the daughter of the woman his family had destroyed. He gripped the steering wheel, his reflection pale in the glass. I'll make it right, he whispered. Whatever it takes. For the first time in his life, Adrian Blackwell wasn't driven by pride, but by purpose. The following morning, the Blackwell mansion felt colder than ever. Adrian stood at the top of the grand staircase, staring down at the portraits of his ancestors, rows of proud faces who had built their empire on other people's losses. He'd never noticed how lifeless their eyes looked until now. He couldn't shake the image of the little girl clutching that bracelet in the newspaper photo. Amara. She had been 7 years old, standing in the rubble of her destroyed home while cameras flashed and the world moved on. Now, she was the trembling waitress he'd humiliated, and he was the man carrying her mother's pain in his pocket. He didn't want pity. He wanted change. Adrian arrived at the Blackwell corporate tower just before noon. Employees straightened up as he passed. No one had ever seen him this serious. He went straight to the executive floor, ignoring greetings, and entered his father's conference room without knocking. Victor looked up from a meeting with board members. Adrian, this isn't the time. It is, Adrian interrupted. Because if we don't make this right, the Blackwell name won't survive another generation. The directors exchanged uneasy glances. Adrian threw a file on the table. Inside were copies of property records, legal papers, and photos of the demolished Harris neighborhood. These are the lands you took, the families you displaced. There's still one active trust under our name that controls that property. I want it released to the original owners. Victor's jaw tightened. You have no authority to— I do. Adrian cut in sharply. You made me vice president last year to learn responsibility. Consider this my first decision. Victor's face turned crimson. You're out of line. No, Father, Adrian said quietly. I'm finally in line with what's right. The room went silent. One of the older board members cleared his throat. Mr. Blackwell, perhaps it's time we address the company's public image. These protests from former residents have been damaging. Victor glared at him but said nothing. Adrian took a deep breath. If we don't fix this ourselves, someone else will, And they'll bury us. I'm visiting the old site this evening, with or without your approval." Victor's voice was low and cold. "If you walk out of this building, you walk out of this family." Adrian hesitated only for a second. Then he turned, looking his father in the eyes. "Then I guess I'm finally free." By sunset, Adrian was driving through the edge of the city, where luxury towers gave way to cracked pavements and forgotten homes. The car's headlights caught glimpses of half-demolished walls, faded murals, and rusted fences. It felt like entering another world, the world his father had buried. He stopped at a small community center built from salvaged bricks. Outside, children played soccer with a dented ball. Inside, volunteers served food to families, and there, at the far table, stood Amara, wearing a plain t-shirt, her hair tied back, that same calm determination in her eyes. She froze when she saw him. "What are you doing here?" "I came to listen," he said softly. The room fell quiet. A few older men muttered among themselves, recognizing his face from the news. "That's Blackwell's boy," someone hissed. "Get him out!" Adrian raised his hands. "Please, I'm not here to defend him. I'm here because I know what he did was wrong." Amara studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Let him speak." He told them everything, how he'd discovered the truth, how his father had justified it, how he wanted to return what was taken. His voice trembled at times, but he didn't hide his shame. When he finished, silence filled the room. Then an elderly man stepped forward. Amara's grandfather, his face lined with grief and years of resilience. "You can't return the dead, son," he said quietly, "but you can rebuild what's living." Adrian nodded. "That's all I want, to rebuild." Over the next few weeks, Adrian began what everyone called the impossible task. He liquidated a portion of his trust fund, transferred ownership of the vacant lots back to the Harris Foundation, and hired local builders to create affordable housing. News outlets picked up the story. Billionaire's son challenges his own father's. Legacy. Victor refused to speak to him, but Adrian didn't care. For the first time, he felt like he was doing something real. Amara kept her distance at first, unsure if she could trust him. But she watched. She saw him working side by side with construction crews, covered in dust instead of designer suits. She saw him sit with children, teaching them how to plant trees in the newly rebuilt park. Slowly, the hatred in her eyes softened into respect. One evening, after the day's work, Adrian found her standing under the half-built archway that would soon become the entrance to the new community center. He smiled faintly. "Not as fancy as a skyscraper, but I think it'll last longer." Amara looked at him, then at the bracelet now resting safely around her wrist again. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did," he replied. "Because I broke something I didn't even know was mine to fix." She hesitated. "You can't erase the past, Adrian." "I'm not trying to," he said. "I'm trying to build a future that honors it." Weeks later, Victor finally appeared at the site unannounced. His limousine stopped beside the dirt road, drawing everyone's attention. Workers froze. Adrian wiped his hands and walked over, his heart pounding. Victor stepped out, looking around with visible disdain. "So this is what you've traded our legacy for? A handful of broken houses and cheap goodwill?" Adrian met his gaze calmly. "No. I traded greed for peace. You should try it." Victor's expression flickered. Anger, then pride, then something unreadable. He looked at Amara, then at the new homes rising behind her. "Your mother's land," he murmured. "It was good land." "She thought so too," Amara replied quietly. Victor's jaw tightened. "You've made your point, Adrian. I hope it was worth it." "It was," Adrian said simply. Victor turned to leave, but before he stepped into the car, he paused. The press wants to know why we're donating these properties. I'll tell them it was a joint decision. That's all you'll get." Adrian smiled faintly. "That's all I need." By the end of that month, the Harris Community Center officially opened. Children laughed, families moved into new homes, and the once ruined neighborhood glowed with life again. Amara stood beside Adrian as the crowd applauded. For the first time, he didn't feel like a Blackwell. He felt human. As the ceremony ended, Amara unclasped the bracelet from her wrist and held it out to him. "My mother would have wanted you to have this," she said. Adrian shook his head. "It belongs here." He placed it inside a glass case at the community entrance, beneath a plaque that read, "From ashes we rise, not as enemies, but as equals." The crowd fell silent for a moment, moved by the words, and in that stillness, Adrian realized something profound. Justice wasn't about revenge or pride. It was about restoration. And redemption didn't require forgiveness from others. It began when he forgave himself. Months had passed since the reopening of the Harris Community Center. The neighborhood, once a shadow of broken walls and burnt memories, now thrived with laughter, colors, and life. Children ran freely through the newly planted gardens, and the sound of hammers and saws had been replaced by music and chatter. The small silver bracelet gleamed faintly in its display case, catching the sunlight that streamed through the community hall windows. Adrian Blackwell stood beside Amara, watching as families settled into their new homes. His hands were calloused from work that was once foreign to him, lifting bricks, digging foundations, planting trees. But each ache reminded him that he had chosen to step into a world beyond his privilege, a world where his actions finally mattered. Amara glanced at him, her eyes soft but cautious. "You've done more than I expected," she said. "But it's not just about money or rebuilding homes. You've learned something, haven't you?" Adrian nodded. "I've learned that no amount of wealth can replace human dignity. That the smallest gestures, respect, empathy, honesty, mean more than power or status." He looked at the bracelet. It's more than a piece of silver. It's a story, a memory, a warning. And it reminds me that every action has consequences, even for someone like me." Amara finally smiled. It was a quiet, genuine smile, the kind that had been absent the night he had humiliated her. "Then maybe your father isn't the only one carrying the Blackwell name anymore," she said softly. Adrian chuckled, a sound lighter than any he'd made in years. "Maybe. I don't want to carry it the way he did. I want to carry it differently, responsibly, with purpose, with care." At that moment, a small boy ran up to them, holding a soccer ball. "Mr. Blackwell, are you coming to play with us?" Adrian knelt down, laughing genuinely, and joined the children in a game of soccer. For the first time, he wasn't a billionaire's son playing at wealth. He was a man among equals, learning humility, earning respect, and finding joy in simplicity. Back at the display case, the bracelet rested as a symbol, catching the sunlight just so. It had survived a lifetime of loss and injustice, and now it represented resilience, hope, and change. Amara had made sure of that. The bracelet was no longer just a memory of pain. It was a testament to strength and the possibility of redemption. Adrian watched her from across the room. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Not just for trusting me, but for showing me that it's never too late to do the right thing." Amara shook her head. "You didn't have to do it. Most people in your position would have ignored us, but you chose differently. That counts for more than anything else." He nodded, humbled. "I've realized something important. Justice isn't about punishment. It's about restoration. And redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a better future from it." Amara smiled, and the tension between them melted into mutual respect. They stood together, watching the neighborhood thrive, the sound of children's laughter, the chatter of neighbors, and the music of renewed life filling the air. That evening, Adrian returned to the mansion. His father, Victor, remained silent, observing the changes from a distance. He had learned, in his own stubborn way, that wealth could buy power, but not conscience. Adrian had learned that action, empathy, and courage could reshape legacies. And so the Blackwell name began to transform, not as a symbol of destruction, but as a mark of responsibility. Adrian pledged to continue his father's work differently, one decision at a time, one act of justice at a time, inspired by the bracelet that had reminded him of everything worth protecting. As the camera of your story pans out, or your video closes, the moral is clear. Sometimes the smallest object can carry the heaviest truth. A bracelet isn't just jewelry. It can be a reminder of past mistakes, a symbol of resilience, and a guide toward redemption. And even the most arrogant, privileged people can change when they open their eyes and hearts to justice, empathy, and action. The bracelet sparkled one last time in the sunset, a quiet witness to transformation, hope, and the enduring power of doing what's right. And in that light, Adrian and Amara stood side by side, not as enemies, not as victims, not as the guilty or the innocent, but as people determined to build a future where dignity, compassion, and justice mattered more than wealth, power, or pride.